Company of Prophets, African American Psychics, Healers, and Visionaries. Written by Joyce Elaine Noll. Read by Ausit O'Neill. Chapter 1. Children with Power. In the lives of children who have advanced psychic abilities, there is a profound turning point of a kind. Sometime, when either fully or partially aware, they determine whether they can tolerate their unique abilities. They can resolve to sustain and use the gifts as best they can, or when the ability is seen as diseased by self or others, the child can resort to doing all manner of things to make the disability vanish. A child, bent on being free of his or her attributes, removes an integral part of self, and in that way withdraws from vital aspects of psychic spiritual existence. The effort to cancel the gift may subtract from normal senses as well, and will suppress the child's overall being. In discussing the topic of supernormal abilities in childhood, in both interview and other settings, a number of individuals stated that when it became obvious to them as children that they had a psychic gift, they prayed to God to take it away, or they fought the gift. Some of the reasons given were, they were frightened by the phenomena of the gift, it brought unbearable isolation from others, it ran against familial or peer belief systems. They feared the power it gave them and the power the ability might wield back against them. It was often seen as mysteriously dangerous. In several cases, it was too difficult for the young person to gather the courage needed to maintain the coexistence and exercise of the ability in the face of even mild opposition. Regarding the gift as harmful, the child would seek release and relief through his or her efforts to eradicate or abandon the gift. Some prayed, others pretended it didn't exist, others ignored it, some disowned it. In contrast, a psychic child may be quite aware of his or her life's mission connected with the possession of an extraphysical ability. At an early stage in childhood, such a being may confidently prepare for the actualization of the ability and the goal. That child would be immune to outside influences, standing his or her ground with enormous integrity. With a child who has supernormal attributes, there is always an attendant vulnerability from the conservative orientations of other people. The fragility of the child's own world of psychic realities is pitted against the monolinear physical perspectives of some adults who use adherence to material reality as a guise of absolute power, and those adults who are all-knowing and who affect a strict enforcement and obedience to their constricted belief systems. Such adults create an interpositioning of barriers to the child's recognition, acceptance, and utilization of his or her gifts. The Black psychic child's struggle to incorporate the truth of his or her own expanded universe into life is further complicated by specific traces of contracting negative energy in the collective spiritual consciousness of society. Largely in the past, but even now, within the national collective consciousness, this negativity has been generated. It surfaces as inclinations to minimize, distort, or destroy self-confidence regarding the most ordinary of capabilities that any member of the African American culture might possess. Such persisting consciousness in a mental dimension created by the collective negative energies of our nation in the course of its history constitutes a stagnant repository of centuries-old prejudgmental and attitudinal programming of a racial nature. Although this negative influence lies unperceived from any body orientation, it can still fully impact upon the physical dimension. Reflexively, it activates a negative psychic programming in most on an unconscious level to oppose any African Americans, including children, exhibiting remarkable qualities. These energies of mental opposition and invalidation can be extremely subtle, but a child in the early stages of psychic revelation is sensitive to them as to any substantive, prevailing energies. The African American psychic child's awareness thus becomes dispersed in trying to sort out and identify the many opposing factors in the basically materially oriented society in which he or she lives. Even more telling can be the opposition from closer in, common to all psychic children, that comes from the valued affinities of parents, family, friends, or from the religion which he or she inherited. The effects created by these adversities can be reduced by the child's drawing upon the positive energies of the collective spiritual consciousness of the Black race, which safeguards and balances group members who can resonate at its vibratory frequency. Imparted from the group soul to the consciousness of the child are the original group's African beliefs and acceptances of intuition, of supernormal qualities, and the range of psychic and mystical states of being. The race spirit affirms those qualities. It states out of its own traditions their ascendancy to any transplanted conditions or states, founded culturally or scientifically, imposed and arbitrarily placed by authorities in the material world. Through that collective spiritual consciousness of the Black race, tribute is imparted to those beings possessing spiritual or psychic gifts, no matter whether their bodies identify them as adult or as child. Shortly before she first prophesied, Jenny Benson, then 8 years old, was outside playing in the yard. All at once, she ran indoors with a message for her grandmother. "Mama," I said, "Aunt Mahalia is dead." She said, "Oh my God, who told you?" I said, "Something told me." She hauled off and hit me upside the head, pow. "What did you tell that lie for?" In a while, one of Jenny's cousins came by on a horse. As he approached, he called out to her grandmother, "Cousin Nance, I stopped by to tell you Aunt Mahalia is dead." My grandmother asked when, and it was just the time I told her. But there was no apology forthcoming to the girl for delivering authenticated spirit-prompted messages, or for the blow that punctuated the prophecy. They thought I was crazy. I had to be determined. My grandmother said I wasn't going to live long. I was too peculiar. I got a backhand lick for telling the truth. It didn't stop me. When I was born, there was no such thing as birth control pills. Not in the country of Mississippi. My mother was pregnant but one time, and that was with me. She prayed to God to close up her womb. I never stayed with my mother, but while she was with me, she said I was very peculiar. I stayed with my grandparents. Though unappreciated by adults in those early days, she confides how her playmates waited eagerly to hear her pronouncements. They would ask me questions and I would say, "Tonight I'm going to talk to the Lord. What He tells me, I'm going to tell you." Her friends accepted Jenny's prophetic messages and always seemed satisfied with what she said. She was but 8 years old when the inward voice she hears told of her destiny. "The Lord told me I would be in Nashville, Tennessee, and of the good works I would do for Him." 3 gifts have been realized since childhood by Jenny Benson Vaughn. The gifts of prophecy, preaching, and healing. Residing in Nashville, Tennessee, she is the minister of St. Teresa Holiness Science Church and holds ministerial positions in several churches in other states. Most of these churches she helped found. Henry was bouncing in and out of his body after his tonsils were removed. It started as he came from under the anesthesia. Seeing his body from different locations in the hospital room and being acutely aware that he was yet in another space at distance from his body caused the 8-year-old to feel alarmed and insecure. He tried to tell the nurse what was happening, but she didn't seem to hear him. That night, he attempted to anchor himself by concentrating, but he would involuntarily relax and end up somewhere else in the room, again viewing his prostrate body. He battled all night, but was unable to keep spirit, mind, and body in the same place. The experience brought a marked change into the South Side Chicago boy's life. He now felt a depth of uncertainty and loss. That which had been real to him before, and in agreement with everybody else he knew, was undone. From then on, he heard voices and saw pictures projected in his head. He was often the awed and unwilling receiver of the transmitted thoughts and emotions of others. People's faces changed as he looked at them. Their past lives' facial features opened to his view. Even while he was in a schoolroom, he traveled out of his body in astral flight, to the detriment of his academic performance. An inner voice emerged. He learned from the voice, but he was upset by its presence in his universe. Henry was ashamed and embarrassed about his newly extended perceptions. This facet of himself was further inhibited after he offered to help a disabled man through his young healing gift and was rejected. The man's wife firmly told Henry not to bother them with that nonsense. Concern over being singled out as a kook or classified as insane prompted Henry to keep his impressions contained, so that the boundaries of that inner world never flowed over into his social life. Persistently he monitored himself in this manner, thus succeeding at being a normal person during his childhood and into early manhood. It took many years for Henry Rucker to openly accept his psychic talents. When he did, the inner voice instructed him around his primary gift, psychic healing, which in childhood he had repressed into a state of limbo. Between 10 and 12, I could tell in advance when something was going to happen. If I wanted someone to do something, I would send them a thought. Or I would send a thought to not do something. At that time, I was a mean, hateful child. My energy was strong. I could project it to hurt a person, and I knew I could, recalls Jessica Marshall. Separated from her mother and native Louisiana at 7 years old, she and her older sister were transported to Oakland to live with her father and his new wife. The move was traumatic for Jessica, who changed from a good-natured child to a sullen one. I was angry with my father and stepmother. I never got into fights. I could see things happening to friends and I would tell them, but they didn't like it, so I stopped telling them. Jessica became a loner with only 1 or 2 friends. I learned to play by myself. I couldn't take crowds for some reason or other, but I loved sports and was captain of a team. I had leadership abilities. In this period, the family moved to Los Angeles. Her father, whom she calls adventuresome, presented his children with many creative challenges. I was often plagued by being the only black. My father wanted us to be aware of everything. He wanted us to be around and familiar with different cultures and different religions. He wanted us to understand that people were only people, regardless of color, that we are all one. My gift was a knowing, but I didn't know how I knew. I could always see something before it happened. I thought everyone could. I was 14 when I found out that everyone couldn't. For a year after she died, Bob's aunt appeared to him from time to time in his family's kitchen. He was then 7 or 8. Another spirit, a guide, had come shortly after the death to help him. I missed a lot of unpleasant things by following what that spirit told me, Bob now says, looking back. The guide directed him not to go down certain streets, saving him from encounters with bullies and loose dogs. He became able to control dogs which dashed towards him. When they came within a hair's breadth, they could advance no more, and he could walk away. He was so well oriented by spirit that he never got lost in all of his childhood meanderings, first through the streets of Memphis, and later through the streets of Chicago. That other children or adults could get lost mystified him. Now an adult whose occupation is in sales, Bob Edwards lives in Los Angeles. His psychometric gift is strong. He picks up vibrations from an individual's possessions and receives mental pictures of that individual's current circumstances. In his psychic work, he finds lost items, animals, and people. He is assisted in his readings by his inner voice and a male spirit guide. Almost 50 years later, Dorothy Hall still tells this story. She fervently insists even today that she knew nothing about the outcome of a prediction spoken through her teenage body, except that it was revealed through an inner voice and vision. There was this girl at school, Clara, a kind of fast kid. She used to pick at me all the time. Her desk was behind mine. One day she hit me on the shoulder. Dot, you know what? I'm going to a party tomorrow night, me and my friends. And I know you wish you could go. I know you wish you could go, and I know you can't go, because your mama don't let you go nowhere, except to school and back home. She was picking on me like that, trying to make me feel real bad. I just sat there and looked at her. All of a sudden, I could see this blood coming out of her face. At the same time, a voice was telling me, "Tell her don't go." I had to say, "Clara, don't go to the party." At Dorothy's entreaty, Clara's tactics changed from razzing to railing. "You can't tell me what to do, and you sure ain't my mama." Impelled by the voice, Dorothy continued, "If you go to that party, I see you getting hurt." Unnerved, Clara laughed uneasily and walked away with her friends. "That girl's crazy," Dorothy heard her say as they left the classroom. 3 days later, Dorothy's teacher sent her to the principal. A detective and police officer were there with him. The principal asked me what I had said to Clara on Friday, and I told him. The confused and frightened 13-year-old struggled to tell why she said Clara shouldn't go. She was not yet familiar with the language pertaining to psychic phenomena, so all she could do is say something told her to give the message. Reproachfully, the principal disclosed that Clara was in the hospital. At the party, someone had cut her with a razor. The consensus among the adults was that Dorothy knew something about it. Denounced as uncooperative, Dorothy was suspended from school, only to be readmitted after the bishop of her church intervened. She remained a student for 1 more year, leaving when she reached the 8th grade. The bishop told them they had better not expel me no more, and they didn't, but they would watch me in a peculiar way. I felt funny, so I quit and took a place on the job, staying in with white people. Prophesying was Dorothy's strongest childhood gift, but relaying prophetic communication from the spirit world had caused her upsets prior to the incident at school and would cause upsets in the future. Nevertheless, the Chicago girl was often moved to share spiritual pronouncements with others in her well-intentioned but blunt way. At home, there was a constant collision of wills between Dorothy and her mother over the girl's prophesying. Her mother, a member of the Methodist Church, urged Dorothy to stop the nonsense through verbal and physical reprimand. Intent upon helping, and despite harsh punishment, Dorothy continued to relay unwanted messages to the disapproving parent all through her childhood. An only child, Dorothy was the survivor of a set of twin girls. In looking back on her share of childhood camaraderie, she comments, "I mostly stayed to myself. I didn't have no sisters, no brothers, no nothing. I wanted to play with kids, but they didn't want to play with me. They acted funny with me, so I just stayed to myself." But one friendship from childhood she can recall, a secret one. Soon after she moved to a new home with her mother and stepfather, Dorothy met a white man. Every night at 12 o'clock, this man would come through the back door and get me out of bed. He would be dressed in a tuxedo with a white shirt, black bow tie, and a tall black hat. He would take me by the hand to the backyard and set me in the swing my stepdaddy made for me. I would go with him because I thought he was human. He would talk to me. He told me he had a lot of money, but not to tell nobody. I was about 9 years old at the time, and I said I wouldn't tell. He made me promise. I'm thinking he's human because he looks human. I didn't know he was a spirit. He told me the money was right beneath where I was swinging in a tin box and that it was for me and nobody else. My mother got up one night and she had to go right by my room to get to the bathroom, and she missed me. I wasn't in the bed. I could hear her calling my name, but I couldn't answer. Finally, when I come to myself, I said, "Mama, I'm out here with..." When I said with, I looked around and there wasn't a soul out there. So my mother took me in and beat me because she thought I was just out in the backyard at 3 o'clock in the morning. Oh, how she whipped me. "Mama, I wasn't out there by myself. The man was out there with me." She sure enough whipped me then. So I had to tell her. I had to break my vow. So I told her about the money under the swing. Dorothy's stepfather and a few friends dug under the swing to search for the money. They struck the box at the place pointed out by Dorothy, but as they reached for it, the surrounding earth collapsed and the box sank. A fear-inducing aura permeated the excavated area, disturbing Dorothy's stepfather so much that shortly thereafter he moved the family again. Ordained in a spiritual church at 14, with her gift being fully recognized, Dorothy prophesied from the pulpit. Of that period in her life, Dorothy observes, "I was at church more than at home." The minister of a spiritual church, counselor, and healer, Dorothy Hall lives in Chicago, where she was born. Alpha, the first of 9 children, was raised from day one by her maternal grandmother, as she says it. Her mother was still in college, and the birth was a difficult one. Delivered prematurely, Alpha entered life with bronchitis and a film of tissue called a veil covering her head. Her grandmother was an influential force in her life whom Alpha studied closely. Although the older woman had not gone beyond the 3rd grade in formal schooling, she worked intensely with her grandchild around studies. By 5 years old, Alpha could write a business letter, redone under her grandmother's tutelage, until a certain level of perfection was reached. Heartened by the relationship she shared with her grandmother, the girl was inspired to seek out the companionship of elderly people. Then, too, she was a child who didn't care for games much at all because they were win or lose, as she summarizes it. Her psychic self seems to have always been active in childhood, but in growing up, she recalls tending to push back that aspect of herself. Although none of those early intuitive experiences stands out, she remembers that as a child sometimes her head would seem to open up with information flowing in, and that she would smell flowers in the most unlikely situations. There were also her abilities to see ghosts and to smell death. Alpha Omega, born in Aldrich, Alabama, is a longtime resident of New York City. She is a teacher, lecturer, and healer. More than once, when sickness kept him home from school, Lee felt himself being observed by the figure. In front of his bed, gazing upon him with piercing and loving eyes, was a monk, resembling St. Francis. Not frightened, the boy absorbed the love. He needed it. In his physical life, love was marked by its inadequacy. He was a lone child raised by a mother who expressed her unknown guilt to him in anger and blows. Lee was an adult when he described his unhappy childhood to Ruth Montgomery, who wrote of him in Threshold to Tomorrow. In the accounting, he spoke of his mother's physical and emotional abuse of him, She was protective, however, and provided well for his physical needs. 4 half-siblings older than he, whom he never saw during childhood, were legally removed from her custody. She had abused them, too. His father, whom he saw on a few occasions, he never really got to know. To others, Lee was a likable child, bright and talented, a self-taught musician who was playing the piano when he was 3. He had learned on a toy piano. He practiced wherever he could, having no piano at home. In a visit to a rest home when he was 12 or 13, Lee practiced on the piano there. Soon heard was a scooting sound, and in turning his head he saw the elderly residents drag folding chairs near to listen to him. They flooded him with admiration, and he loved them back. During the years of grammar and junior high school, the boy regularly visited rest homes and convalescent hospitals even after he obtained his own piano. Ruth Montgomery's spirit guides call Lee a walk-in. Walk-ins are idealistic but not perfected souls who, through spiritual growth in previous incarnations, have earned the right to take over unwanted bodies if their overriding goal is to help mankind. The original occupants vacate the bodies because they no longer can maintain the physical spark of life, or because they are so dispirited that they earnestly wish to leave. Lee William Carnett, Jr. changed his name to Count Carnett in adulthood. He contends he's not aware of that transition taking place, but being a walk-in explains to him much about that early period of his life. After the revelation from Montgomery's guides, Carnett was told again that he was a walk-in by a discarnate named Dr. Kaleo. In direct voice channeled through Carnett himself, the being told of how the transition was made when Carnett was less than 10 years old. From Dr. Kaleo's reading, as reported in Montgomery's book, it was one of the rare cases of a walk-in entering the body of a child, but it was necessary because the boy was on the verge of a nervous breakdown or suicide. A concert pianist, composer, and vocalist who performs intuitively, having no professional training, Count Carnett resides in Seattle, Washington, where he was born. Performing traditional music and a type of music he describes as psychic, he tours the country giving recitals. From materials in one of his record albums, the following quote is taken: "I plan to work earnestly and faithfully as a worker of light, a blessing to those who would let music speak to them. My conviction is that the heavenly vibrations flowing through this music have the power to heal the sick, put an end to wars, and once again bring about peace and harmony to our planet Earth." The 2 children were playing Ring Around the Rosie when Louise saw them from her grandparents' veranda. They were about her age, 7 years old. The girl was prettily attired in a white dress with ruffles to the tail. The boy's outfit was white, too. He wore a whole suit with a wide-collared shirt, Louise still recalls vividly. She saw they were really having a good time, and she became excited at the thought of joining their game. But her grandmother, stepping out of the house at Louise's call for permission to play, responded with a gentle but firm "No." Seating herself beside Louise, she drew her close. "The children are not real," she explained. She herself could not see them. She reminded her grandchild that seeing into the world of spirit was the young one's own special gift, like her other gift, which was to know of things beforehand. The 2 black children, clad in finery, and seeming so full of happiness in their games on the adjacent cemetery green, were not the first discarnates Louise had seen, but they were certainly among the first to impact upon her so strongly. Long before she was 7, the spirit world opened to Louise. Her ability to predict had come earlier. Forerunner was a nickname given her by her grandfather, who was proud of her abilities. Louise Washington is a licentiate minister and certified medium in the National Spiritualist Association of Churches. Her church, the Tucker Smith Memorial Spiritualist Church, is in Chicago. She grew up in Walterboro, South Carolina.